Welcome to today's ITFA podcast. My name is Harpreet Mann. In addition to co-chairing the ITFA Americas chapter, I am also president of Minta Trade Credit and Political Risk Solutions. I am thrilled today to have Dan Renberg join me in lending his expertise on a current hot topic in the U.S., tariffs. Dan is a partner and government relations practice co-leader at the law firm ArentFox Schiff. For more than 30 years, Dan has worked in Washington, D.C., either in public service or as an advocate before Congress, the executive branch, and others. Thank you so much for being here today, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about the opportunity to chat with you and learn from you.
We're excited as well. So just to set the stage, we're here to talk about tariffs. Tariffs are generally imposed on imports of goods to reduce trade deficits or protect the domestic industry from dumping. We are seeing a flurry of activity on the issue of tariffs. What is President Trump trying to accomplish with these tariffs?
Well, that's a great question. To hear him say it, I think there are a couple of different issues that he's trying to tackle. First and foremost, I think that he sees foreign trading partners as, in some cases, having taken advantage of the U.S. market and the U.S. citizenry. I think he also doesn't believe that some countries are doing enough on hot button issues, from immigration to fentanyl. So this is all part of one larger attempt to help America resurrect itself in terms of global trade, but also to tackle some very, very serious domestic issues. And he's using some previously untapped authorities. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, is something where if you declare a national emergency, it gives you authority. While the statute doesn't specifically say tariffs, as I recall, he has invoked that statute, which is a fairly open-ended statute compared to some other tariff authorities. So we're in uncharted waters. It's a challenging time for importers. It's a challenging time for our friends abroad, but hopefully we can get through this and keep our economy on track.
And under the act, he invoked a national emergency based on the southern border crisis due to illegal immigration or border crossings and drugs like fentanyl. And that was in that briefing that the White House issued at the time he talked about implementing the tariffs.
Right. And he also, to my first point, he's talked a lot about America is, almost even trod upon. Just today, he again posted on his social media that April 2nd, which is when a lot of these tariffs are scheduled as of now to go into effect. He says April 2nd is Liberation Day in America. And he wrote about how our country needs to get money and respect back. He says that for decades we've been ripped off and abused by every nation in the world, both friend and foe. Now, personally, I haven't seen it like that during this time, but he's really trying to elevate tariffs as a way of helping the U.S. with its global posture by defining it as Liberation Day in all caps. I would point out in his post, it was to me reminiscent of the movie Independence Day when the actor Bill Pullman, who's portraying the U.S. president, grabs a handheld microphone and spoke about how today's the day we fight. Today is truly our Independence Day. And I happen to, be a movie fan, and that's a really compelling scene. I think that the president may be trying to capture some of that and to really thrust this international trade policy world into a whole new Hollywood-esque surrounding.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think that provides a great backdrop as to why we are where we are today in respect to tariffs. So if we can shift to the status of these tariffs, specifically with respect to Mexico and Canada, we have the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement in place. And then the president has issued an order that there should be 25% tariffs on both goods coming in from Mexico and Canada, and then an exemption for energy resources from Canada by imposing 10%. What is the status of that, and how does that, the tariffs he's now imposing against the trade agreement we have in place?
Well, it's really been a challenge for trade lawyers and policy professionals to keep track on a daily basis of where we are. At one point, there was a threat of 50% tariffs on our trading partners, Canada and Mexico. As you said, it's 25%, with some down at 10%. And now there's also, for the last 10 days or so, there's an exemption if you are a USMCA covered product. There's just been really a lot of whiplash going on in terms of trying to keep tabs. I've started wearing a cervical collar, like someone who's been in a car accident, because I'm like pulled from side to side. I think that ultimately what the president's doing is he's trying in a pretty tough manner to bring Canada and Mexico back to the table. And I think he knows that the U.S. is stronger with them as positive trading partners than some of what we've seen. And so it seems to me that there will have to be a coming to the table and a discussion. And at some point, and the southern border comes into this, and the fentanyl crisis comes into this, at some point, we need him to be able to declare victory and take away the tariffs and have the corresponding tariffs, the retaliatory tariffs, taken away as well. I'm really hopeful it happens sooner, not later, because we certainly don't want to have economic tribulations here in the U.S. As a result.
Given that you are focused on certain industries, what are some of the ramifications that you're seeing or changes in certain sectors or industries that you specifically focus on?
Well, thanks for asking that. I'm sensitive, based on some of the lobbying I've been doing on tariff policy for some of our clients. I'm very sensitive to the kind of downstream adverse impact. It's very easy to focus on the fact that if I'm a company in the United States and I need product X from the EU or from Canada, and it's going to cost me 25% more, everyone's fairly familiar with the difficulty. Do I pass it along to the consumer? Will the consumer demand go down, in which case I have to produce less of it? That's pretty well known. You don't really have to major in economics to know that that can cause some issues. But what I've been hearing is a lot of stories of downstream problems, collateral damage, if you will. For instance, if consumer demand for products from abroad is reduced, that means that there's less activity at our ports on the Atlantic seaboard and the Pacific coast. That means that trucks and other modes of shipment are less used. There's fewer boxes and containers to move from point A to point B. One client told me even something as simple as supermarket displays that are made of cardboard, they won't necessarily need as many of those if consumer demand goes down. So I'm worried about the brokers, the logistics experts, and others whose livelihoods depend on the imports. It's not just the manufacturer in the United States that's going to get hit. Some of these tariffs seem like they're going to have really widespread consequences. And that's where I think you start to see some dips in the stock market. You start to see consumer confidence maybe falling a bit, businesses making decisions not to spend right now, but to hold out and see what the future holds. So collateral damage, downstream impacts, to me, really merit consideration by the administration and by Congress as part of this overall analysis.
And that's a really good perspective to bring into the discussion, because we have been talking about inflation, certain industries, but to talk about logistics and the downstream impact is equally as important. Given what you do in DC, what are some of the strategies that companies or certain sectors can take to mitigate the impact of these tariffs?
Well, certainly there's the potential for legal challenges. Lawyers around the city here in DC are looking at how they might be able to file a lawsuit or lawsuits to try to limit the president's authority in this way. So that's kind of a time-honored tradition, filing a lawsuit. Court of International Trade can get involved. Federal district courts can get involved. But then on the policy side, one of the things we're seeing is in the last Trump administration, when they imposed a number of types of tariffs on steel and other commodities, there was an exclusion process that was orchestrated by U.S. TR, we have not seen a commitment to a product by product, category by category exclusion process. So I think that there are a lot of stakeholders that are going up to Congress and to the administration, but especially to Congress, to ask for help in either getting off of the tariff list for a specific category or group of categories of imports, or to make sure that there is going to be a process by which someone objective could analyze the case for why a product, a category should be excluded from the tariffs going forwards. One thing that is painful to a lot of companies that import is that during any such process, you still have to pay the tariffs. Litigation or looking for a legislative approach using Congress to talk to the administration, you're still going to be paying the tariffs. Your hope is that you'll get refunded. And that's something that everyone needs to consider. But I think this is a great time for companies, interested parties, to go to their members of Congress, to go to the committees of Congress with jurisdiction, and to make a positive case as to why what they're importing should not be subject to tariffs. And you have to be creative in your approach. That's what we try to do here at ArentFox Schiff. We try to come up with the best possible arguments, noting both the employee impact and the consumer impact. And then, of course, as I said a moment ago, the downstream impact. Who else is going to be harmed by this? And that's what we're trying to do.
And this is normally the area of tariffs is normally managed by Congress. And so what is, from your interaction, what is the attitude or the approach of Congress members towards the impact of tariffs on their constituents or on certain industries?
Well, I think it depends a little bit on party. Let me start with the Democrats, who are currently in the minority in the House, the minority in the Senate. I think that a number of Democratic members are exasperated with the imposition of tariffs, the threatened tariffs that haven't yet been imposed. A number of them have tried to introduce legislation that would restrict the president's authority. Senator Coons of Delaware in late February introduced legislation only supported by Democrats, as I recall, to restrict the president's ability to impose tariffs on our allies and free trade agreement partners. And Senator Coons, to make a point, went to the Senate floor and asked unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to and pass his legislation. So he was basically not relying on the traditional bill goes to committee reports it out, then there's a Senate vote. He tried to make a point by asking for unanimous consent to pass the bill, and Senate Finance Committee Chairman Mike Crapo of Idaho objected to it, so the bill did not pass at that moment. But the Democrats have had trouble getting traction in how they're in being able to successfully push back. They're certainly giving it their all, and they're trying to be very creative as they do that. There are some Republicans who've been public about their concerns, especially ag state Republicans, worried about the retaliatory tariffs that we can expect from our friends in Canada, Mexico, the EU. But many Republicans have held their fire. And what I have seen recently is at the staff level, some Republican members' staff have said, look, we're not going to go out there and do press conferences lambasting the administration on its tariff policy, but we are willing to help our constituents by letting USTR know, there's an Office of Congressional Affairs there, we're willing to let them know that we've got some concerns about Category X or Category Y. So I think that if, back to your strategies question, I think it's important to go to people from both parties and to try to leverage Congress on this issue. But we're not seeing Republicans introducing bills to restrict the president's authority like we did a few years ago.
Okay, thank you for that. That's great insight. You just mentioned retaliatory measures. What are some of those measures that countries like China, for example, can take?
Well, certainly the easiest is if we put a 25% tariff on something or 50% tariff, another country could do the same. But there are also non-tariff barriers that can be really, really problematic for American exporters and companies that would like to get into exporting. You can have restrictions on content of a project, of a product imposed by the foreign country. They could limit preservatives in a certain type of product, for instance. All the while, being able, the foreign country could say, well, we're trying to protect our citizens from X and Y. They could put labeling requirements on U.S. products that make it more difficult. And of course, they can do a quota on imports. The U.S. Has occasionally done quotas on products, commodities coming from the EU, for instance. So other countries can put quotas on our stuff as well. So you've got a combination of both the direct tariff imposition and then also these non-tariff barriers. And it gets to be quite a mess.
Thank you very much. Are there any predictions that we can make about where the tariff strategy is going to go, or because it seems to there's so much change constantly and news, but I wonder if there's any predictions you want to make.
I predict that this issue is not going away anytime soon. I predict that the president will continue to try to get these other countries to the negotiating table, both on the trade issues and then some of these other collateral issues. And I predict that we're in for a bit of a rough ride here, but that people shouldn't lose hope. If the stock market goes down considerably, if inflation goes up considerably, I think there will be even more pressure to limit the scope of the duration of these tariffs. That could be a catalyst for getting back to a more stable environment. But I think we've still got a ways to go before that happens. And it really is up to the American consumers and American companies, and financial institutions, and people who are involved in trade finance, of course, to let their elected officials know that they've got concerns where they do. There are, of course, some entities that might favor protectionist tariff on A, B, or C, and they think that they'll thrive. It's not monolithic, but folks should let their policymakers know, their elected officials know if they have concerns. That's one way to try to get people to the table and to try to resolve this and put it behind us.
Dan, this has been a terrific conversation. It's fair. There's a lot of insight that you provided, and I suspect that we're probably going to have you back in a couple of weeks with the degree to which things seem to change on a daily basis. So thank you very much. And to the audience, I hope that you got some insight on potential impact on trade flows that are often supported by trade finance. Thanks again, Dan, and thanks to the audience.
Thank you so much for having me. I know that you post these on Spotify. I hope that the two of us will be able to knock Taylor Swift off of the #1 position.
That is the goal. That is the goal. Thank you very much again.